You ever wake up to the sound of desperation so thick you could cut it with a knife? That's what happened to me at 5 in the morning when Margaret Wellington called, her voice breaking, begging me for help. 500 cattle dying. She'd do anything, please. But all I felt was a strange calm, sipping my coffee beside my new well, watching the sun come up on land my family had tended for decades. I know it sounds cold, but by then, something inside me had hardened up good. When the HOA tried to stop me from digging on my own ranch, they made the worst mistake of their lives. They messed with the wrong farmer, a man who'd been underestimated one time too many, and this time I wasn't backing down. You want to know how we got here? Well, buckle up, because this isn't your average neighbor dispute. The kind of story that starts with a quiet man minding his own business and ends with an entire empire crashing down over water, secrets, and a level of petty that could outlast a Texas drought. My roots in this land go back to 1952, when my granddad's mart as a fox bought up not just the acres but the water and mineral rights too, including a chunk of the eastern shore of Crystal Lake. Folks barely paid attention to that detail back then, but Grandpa always said, "Water is life, Henry. You remember that." Turns out he was a prophet. Over 38 years I watched the world change out here. Neighbors come and go. Lakes rise and fall. The HOA roll in with big plans and tiny minds, but I always kept that old advice close. About 20 years ago, I cut a deal with Margaret. Just started building her cattle operation. Needed water for a few hundred head, and I had more than I needed. I let her draw from my portion of the lake for a rate that was cheap even back then. Call me naive, but I believed in community over profit, thought neighborliness counted for something. Well, she took that deal and ran 500 head now. She's the local Dairy Queen, as the paper loves to call her, and her operation grew like a weed after a summer storm. And the whole time she's been drawing water from my land, paying me the same old rate. I never pushed for more, never tried to renegotiate, figured gratitude would count for something. Yeah, that was mistake number 1. Then came the drought, the worst in 50 years. Every day, I watched my crops wither and the lake shrink, and I realized I had to do something, or I'd lose it all. So I made the call to dig a well, tapping into the aquifer under my own land. That's when the HOA president, Victoria Sterling, all pearls and pressed pantsuit, showed up at my gate waving a cease and desist letter like it was the Holy Grail. "You can't dig that well, Henry," she said, voice dripping with entitlement. "It's against HOA regulations." Regulations she invented, of course. She wasn't even here when my granddad set fence posts. Before I could respond, Margaret rolls up in her brand new truck, acting like she owns the place, talking about how my little vanity project threatens her whole business. I'm standing there, dust on my boots, and it hits me just how far things have gone. Neighbors turning into adversaries. Respect out the window. Margaret doesn't even bother with small talk, just launches into her demands. "Henry, I need that water. My cattle depend on it. You can't mess up the whole water table just for your crops." I tell her straight, "You don't own the lake, Margaret. You rent water rights from me." She laughs in my face, calls me small time, says her ranch employs 50 people and keeps the county running, like I'm just some obstacle in her path. The HOA backs her up, threatens fines, legal action. Victoria's nephew is the county attorney. Margaret sits on the water board. It's all tied up tight. As they strut away, convinced they've boxed me in, I can't help but smile. "Maybe check whose lake you've been using all these years, Margaret." The look on her face was worth every bit of hassle that followed. That night, I dug through old filing cabinets, deeds, surveys, water rights certificates, every scrap of paper my father and grandfather ever saved. Turns out, the eastern 20% of Crystal Lake, including riparian rights, belonged to my family, locked up tight by law going back 70 years. Margaret's ranch just touched the north shore. She had access, but not ownership, not by a mile. I'd been so focused on being the good guy, I never bothered to flex that muscle. Well, that was about to change. At the next HOA meeting, the room packed with neighbors, Margaret holding court in the front row, lawyer at her side, Victoria shuffling papers at the podium. I walked up with my briefcase, laid out the evidence, and watched the color drain from their faces. Deeds, contracts, monitoring data, pictures of Margaret's trucks sneaking water from my lake after midnight. selling it off to other ranches for a fat profit. The room erupted. Neighbors who'd been paying Margaret premium prices for stolen water realized they'd been part of her scheme without ever knowing it. Margaret's lawyer tried to spin it, Victoria tried to save face. But the truth was out. Margaret had built her empire on my generosity, then greedily stolen more when it wasn't enough. As of midnight, Wellington Farms' water rights are revoked. No more cheap water. Not from me, not ever. Margaret lost to threaten to sue, begged, even tried to play the sympathy card, but I stood my ground. I told the HOA to check their own bylaws. The 1948 clause protected my property's water rights, long before their rules ever existed. What happened next was nothing short of cinematic. The power dynamic flipped in an instant. Neighbors who'd been scared of Margaret's influence started to rally around me, folks offering fair deals, honest contracts. The HOA's threats crumbled when Victoria's nephew realized he didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Margaret tried everything: threats, bribes, public pleas, but the more she fought, the clearer it became that her empire was built on sand. Then came the aftermath. Margaret tried to truck in water at insane prices, drill new wells on solid bedrock. Good luck. Even begged city officials for emergency supplies, but her reputation was already shot. Cattle started dying by the hundreds. Workers quit. Creditors circled like vultures. Local news showed footage of Margaret sobbing in the dirt, surrounded by dying cattle, her empire collapsing on live TV. Some folks called me heartless for cutting her off, but most understood this wasn't revenge. It was justice. She'd stolen from me and from all of us. The final twist? When she showed up at my gate, all pride gone, begging for just enough water to keep the last of her herd alive. I told her the truth. I'd already arranged for rescue groups and the Humane Society to take in her cattle. The bills go to your bankruptcy court, I said. This isn't for you, it's for them. She tried for an apology, asked if I'd ever forgive her, but I shook my head. That's not up to me, Margaret. Water from my land, never again. That's how a small-time farmer took down the queen of the county, how the mighty HOA collapsed under its own arrogance, and how a community learned, maybe for the first time in a generation, that resources aren't just about money or power, but about respect, trust, and knowing when to say enough is enough. So, what do you think? Was I too harsh, or did Margaret get what was coming to her? Would you have shown mercy, or slammed the door for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What's the wildest HOA story you've ever heard? Hit that like if you believe sometimes the underdog has to bite back. Revenge served cold, just how I like my water.